But I mentioned that we have a scoop tonight, and this is something that I'm sure you haven't seen anything about today. I know that for sure because this is a brand new story that has just been broken by NBC News. Now, the reporters on this story are Jacob Soboroff and Julia Ainsley. We're going to be speaking with Jacob in just a moment. But the origin of this story, I have to tell you, started with a tip that we received here on this show. A tip about the border that led to this reporting that is allowing us to break this story tonight. The tip that we got was specifically about this border station. This is the U.S. Border Patrol station in Yuma, Arizona. Now, you have not previously heard anything about this particular border station and all of the recent reporting on the bad conditions and facilities run near the border by the Trump administration. I mean, the ones that you have heard about, we can put them on a map. The first Homeland Security Inspector General report that we got in May was about terrible conditions in and around El Paso. That led to a bunch of follow-up reporting, including some especially dire reports about a facility just outside El Paso in Clint, Texas. Last week, then, we got another Homeland Security Inspector General report about Trump administration facilities further southeast from there in the Rio Grande Valley, down at the southernmost tip of Texas, around Brownsville and McAllen. Well, now this new reporting that we've got tonight is about a facility on the left side of your screen there, sort of the northwest part of the border, this section of the border that we're talking about. It's a facility in Yuma, Arizona. Yuma, Arizona is right at the sort of tip of Arizona where that state borders both Mexico and California. And for the past few months, Border Patrol has been open about the fact that they were trying to basically incarcerate. They were trying to handle more kids and families there than they had the capacity to deal with. In May, local press reported that in Yuma they were erecting awnings and some temporary fencing, and they had started locking up some immigrants outside because they felt that they didn't have enough space to keep people indoors anymore. Just 2 weeks ago, the Associated Press reported that the Border Patrol had put up a giant new tent at that facility in Yuma to make their station there sort of more officially a prison camp. But in terms of the conditions in which they are holding people, and specifically the conditions in which they're holding kids there, reporters Jacob Soboroff and Julia Ainsley have tonight produced a story that is based on a remarkable new trove of information on the conditions at Yuma. And this is all previously unreported. This is all new. Specifically, what Jacob and Julia obtained are more than 24 significant incident reports. These are significant incident reports written up by U.S. federal government personnel. They're reports based on things described by kids who are all held by Border Patrol at the Yuma border station. These are kids who are not supposed to be held by Border Patrol for more than 72 hours. In all of these significant incident reports, all of these kids, nevertheless, were held for longer than 72 hours. When they were moved out of the Border Patrol facility, they were put in custody of a different federal agency that's supposed to take in kids. They were moved to the custody of the Department of Health and Human Services. And it's case managers from Health and Human Services who wrote these reports. They wrote down these significant incident reports based on what these kids said happened to them while they were in Border Patrol custody. And the picture these incident reports tell at one level is that the same things the Inspector General found in El Paso and in Clint and in McAllen and Brownsville and all those facilities in between, those descriptions of very bad conditions, particularly in which kids are being held, according to these significant incident reports that NBC has obtained tonight, those conditions aren't just happening in Texas, they are also extending to Arizona. This is apparently what they're doing to kids everywhere. And I can show you some of the raw material that we've got. These are direct quotes from these significant incident reports. So here's one from a teenage boy. Quote, the boy, quote, reported sleeping on the floor in a very crowded room. He stated it must have been about 80 to 100 individuals in the room. They didn't have a shower. The boy reported that he was told he had the right to one phone call, but it was never provided during his stay. He also reported sometimes being very cold at night and struggling to find a spot to lay down due to the amount of people in the room. Here's a different report from a teenage girl. Quote, resident reported that there were many girls in a small room. Resident reported that there was not enough space to lay down to sleep as the room was overcrowded. Here's a significant incident report from a 16-year-old boy who was held for 11 days and 12 nights. Quote, minor disclosed that he did not have access to take a shower or to change his clothing while he was in custody. Here's a different teenaged boy. Child reported that there were approximately 50 to 60 people in the holding area where he was detained. Child reported that he would sleep on the floor and he was not provided a pillow or blanket. Child reported that they were not able to shower or clean themselves. Child reported that some of the Homeland Security officials would respond negatively if anyone asked them questions. Child reported that the Homeland Security officials would yell at the detainees. Another teenage boy reports, quote, that he was detained in a room with approximately 70 other minors. The child reported that he was not able to lay down to sleep due to a lack of space and had to sleep sitting down. Here's a different teenaged boy. Quote, client reported he slept in a room that accommodated about 60 other minors. Client states he slept on the floor without an aluminum blanket. Client disclosed that the individuals who were in the same room as him had to take turns sleeping as there was not enough room on the floor for everyone to lay down. Client stated there were no showers available. Here's a significant incident report from a 14-year-old girl who was locked up with her sister. Quote, child reported sleeping on the floors. They were placed in a room with 60 to 70 minors. Child reported there was no room to lay down and oftentimes they would not sleep. Child reported they were not allowed to shower. These incident reports, just one after the other, they describe similar conditions. No space to lay down, no showers, no teeth brushing, no changes of clothes, no phone calls. Some kids also in these incident reports describe getting sick in these facilities. Here's a 15-year-old boy. Quote, child reported that while he was in Homeland Security custody, he felt sick and he had a fever. His throat hurt, causing him not to eat well. He denied receiving any medical attention. Child reported that he was provided with water during his stay. Child disclosed that the water had a lot of chlorine. Child stated he was served something to eat 3 times per day, but since his throat hurt, he was unable to eat. Child also reported that he slept on the floor without a mattress and he was not provided with a blanket. Child disclosed that the temperature at night was really cold. Child disclosed that he slept in a large room with a total of about 40 minors aging 15 to 16 years old. He was not given the opportunity to shower. So again, this is all previously unreported information. There are more than 24 of these significant incident reports that have been obtained by NBC News now that pertain to kids who were held at the Yuma Border Patrol Station in Yuma, Arizona. Now, the fact that these reports exist, that means the Trump administration knows about these conditions. I mean, these are reports that are made to federal workers. These are reports that are written by and filed by caseworkers who work for the federal government. But these reports date from April of this year through mid-June. And this is the first public reporting of these conditions at all. The Trump administration has known about this, but they have not allowed any of this information to become public. This is the first time these conditions have been described. I have to tell you, though, there are a couple of these reports that I'm just going to single out for some specific attention here before we talk with Jacob Soboroff about this reporting, because there are a couple of these incident reports that describe specific alleged behavior by Homeland Security staff it's serious stuff, and I just think you need to know about it. The first one is an allegation of punishment made against the kids. The second one is an allegation of sexual assault by a Homeland Security officer. The punishment allegation is this. This is from a 16-year-old boy. Client stated that the water that he was given, the water tasted like chlorine. Client disclosed that there were about 30 minors in the detention center as well. The other minors started to complain about the food and water that was being provided to them. Client stated that the minors started protesting about it, and because of it, the officers took out all of the sleeping mats. So this is an allegation that Border Patrol staff took away the mats on which kids were allowed to sleep, specifically because they complained about their water tasting like chlorine and having bad quality food. The kids collectively, in this describing, spoke out against that, and they were collectively punished, and they were forced to sleep on the floor and had their mats taken away as punishment. Here's the other specific allegation I want to highlight. Again, Jacob Soboroff and Julia Ainsley turned this up in their reporting as they obtained these significant incident reports. And this one, I'll tell you in advance. This one is disturbing. It concerns a 15-year-old girl. I'm just going to read this verbatim from the significant incident report. Quote, Minor reported that on April 8th, 2019, at approximately 9 p.m., she was inspected by a Homeland Security officer who was heavy-set, tall, and with a beard in front of many other immigrants, males, females, children. Minor reports officer asked her to lift her shirt up to bra line, and then he put his hands inside her bra and touched her breast. Minor reported she felt embarrassed as the officer was speaking in English to other officers and laughing. Minor then said he asked her to pull her pants down from her waist to verify she did not have other pants on underneath. However, Minor said he then pulled them down himself and touched her waist and pulled her underwear. Minor reported officer then asked her to spread her legs and arms and patted her down in a way that made her feel uncomfortable, as she felt he groped her body, her breast, and private parts as well. Minor reported he continued to laugh and speak in English with other officers during the entire process. So that verbatim was reported to a case manager working for the federal government, working for the Trump administration, reported by this teenage girl. Now, what was the response? Well, we can see the way it's marked, the way the response is marked by the case manager in the report. There's a category marked staff response and intervention. And after that category on the form, the case manager has written in, this case manager provided empathetic listening and support, as well as verbalized relief and sense of safety. And there's another category, follow-up and or resolution. Case manager writes this child will be receiving individualized counseling as needed, as well as weekly group counseling. This case manager will continue providing support as needed and will communicate and coordinate with the assigned clinician to ensure the child's needs are being met. Then there's a statement, a place to add recommendations. Recommendations. The case manager fills in assigned clinician to follow up as needed. And then there's a place on the form where it says reported to state licensing. Case manager says no. Was the incident investigated? Case manager says no. So according to this document, according to this significant incident report filled out by a case manager at the Health and Human Services Department, based on a conversation with a 16-year-old girl about her time in custody, an incident that she said happened just before she turned 16, when she was 15 years old. According to this document, the incident was not investigated. The girl was 15 at the time she says this happened. The Trump administration has known about this allegation for more than a month because the date of this incident report is June 5th. That's when this girl came forward to describe what happened to her. We know about it tonight because reporters Jacob Soboroff and Julia Ainsley obtained that significant incident report. It supposedly happened at the U.S. Border Patrol station in Yuma, Arizona. The Trump administration has not released any information about conditions at that facility, let alone incidents like this. Now that NBC News has obtained this information, though, what's going to happen in response? Joining us now is one of the two reporters who broke this story, Jacob Soboroff. Jacob, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate you making time.
Rachel, thanks to you and thanks to your team for collaborating with us on this.
Yeah, I understand that this originated with essentially a tip from a viewer, somebody alerting us to the existence of these incident reports. Let me just ask you about your reporting process a little bit and how you were able to verify that these are what they appear to be.
Well, these significant incident reports, Rachel, are basically taken down by every single case manager at Health and Human Services. Everyone has an intake process, and anytime something is flagged, these case managers fill out one of these forms and they submit them to a variety of oversight agencies. And we were able to, by looking at these forms and triangulating them basically with other forms from other areas within the Department of Homeland Security, able to confirm that these cases, these children indeed did make these allegations.
And Jacob, I want to talk to you about a whole bunch of different parts of this, but in that last incident report that I described, the one that describes what appears to be an alleged sexual assault, there is this notation on that incident report which says explicitly that this incident was not investigated. Do we have any more information on that? Obviously, because this involves a minor child and an allegation of what it would appear to be sexual assault against a federal official in uniform, where the way she describes it, there would have been other witnesses who could have potentially corroborated this story. One would expect that there would be some sort of duty to report. It is surprising to see a notation that this was not investigated. Have you been able to get anything further from the government on this incident in particular?
Yeah, a couple things I want to say about this particular case, Rachel. The tragedy of this case is that this young girl lived inside HHS custody with this story for quite some time before she came forward. She went into HHS custody, if you look at the documents, earlier, weeks earlier, then she ultimately came forward and gave the report. And we've gone to CBP, we've asked them, it had been hours that we had asked them and gone by with no response. But if you don't mind, I just got the email in literally minutes before we came on the show. I want to read to you what CBP said to me about this particular incident. They said U.S. Customs and Border Protection treats those in our custody with dignity and respect and provides multiple avenues to report any allegations of misconduct. The allegations do not align with common practice at our facilities and will be fully investigated. And here's the part about the sexual assaults. Assault, I should say. It's important to note that the allegation of sexual assault is already under investigation by the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General. And now, I suppose on the one hand, that's reassuring, but on the other hand, you've already raised the critical point. They've known about this for quite some time. They've kept this under wraps, and it wasn't like this happened yesterday. They know where it happened. They know who is being alleged to be the perpetrator in this incident, and still nothing from the Department of Homeland Security beyond what we've just gotten.
And again, the timing here is that this girl, in early June, so a little bit more than a month ago, told a caseworker for Health and Human Services that when she was in Homeland Security custody previously in April, which for what it's worth is before she turned 16 years old, she describes in detail what she says was essentially a sexual assault by an officer, by a uniformed officer. It took place in front of other people. This statement that you just got from Customs and Border Patrol saying this is under investigation by the Inspector General Office at Homeland Security, that's the first reference we've ever seen to a potential sexual assault by a staff member, at least this particular one being investigated, right? We've never heard before from the government that this was being looked at.
As far as I know, that's correct, Rachel. And the other thing that's puzzling to me about this response, we put forward, and you read, many very serious allegations against Border Patrol agents at the Yuma Border Patrol station, including retaliation by Border Patrol officers to people literally protesting for clean food and clean water. They mentioned nothing about that. They mentioned nothing about the Inspector General looking into that incident or any of the other dozens of reports that we told them that we've obtained.
Wow. And the only confirmation we get that any of it's being looked at, I should mention, comes in response to a reporter calling them and asking them questions about this stuff. Jacob, thanks for helping us get to the bottom of this story, helping us follow up on those leads that we got. I know that you're going to stay on this, and I hope you'll keep us apprised so we can keep our viewers updated as well.
Absolutely, Rachel. Thanks a lot.
MSNBC correspondent Jacob Soboroff. All right.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.